It is the winter of 1941, and somewhere beneath the unremarkable terraced streets of a provincial English town, a man in a laboratory coat is staring at a dead rat, not in horror, in admiration. He turns it over in his gloved hands, examining its weight, its silhouette, the way it sits so naturally in the palm. Then he sets it down on the workbench beside a small pile of coal, a thermos flask, a fountain pen, and what appears to be a log of firewood. All of them, every last one, are filled with plastic explosive. The rat will be placed in a coal scuttle. When a German maintenance worker reaches in to shovel fuel into a boiler, the resulting explosion will not merely damage the furnace, it will destroy the building. The man in the laboratory coat makes a note in his ledger. He is satisfied. Welcome to Station 9, the most peculiar weapons research establishment in the history of modern warfare, and the place where Britain decided that the best weapon was one that the enemy would never think to look for. The organisation responsible for Station 9 was the Special Operations Executive, created by Winston Churchill in July 1940, with the now legendary instruction to set Europe ablaze. The SOE was not a conventional military body. It was a sprawling, improvisational, frequently chaotic machine designed to arm, train, and supply resistance networks across occupied Europe, to conduct sabotage behind enemy lines, and to make life for the German occupation forces as miserable and unpredictable as possible. To do any of this effectively, it needed weapons and equipment that conventional military procurement could not supply, and would not have imagined requesting. It needed devices that could be smuggled across borders in suitcases, hidden in loaves of bread, buried in garden allotments, or handed to a French housewife who had never fired a gun in her life. It needed, in short, the impossible. The problem was fundamental. Conventional warfare operated on the assumption that weapons would be used by trained soldiers in recognisable combat situations. A Bren gun is an excellent weapon if you are a British infantryman in North Africa. It is a catastrophic liability if you're a Belgian railway worker trying to pass through a German checkpoint. The SOE's agents and the resistance networks they supplied needed something different. Weapons that were silent, concealable, easy enough for an untrained civilian to operate, and so unrecognisable as weapons that they could survive a cursory search. No such weapons existed. The British Armed Forces had no interest in producing them. The conventional armaments industry had no experience designing them, and the technical challenges were, by any rational assessment, formidable. A silent pistol that fits inside a coat pocket, a bomb that looks like a lump of coal, an incendiary device disguised as a tin of motor oil. These were not merely engineering challenges, they were problems of imagination. The man tasked with solving them was Major Cecil Clarke, an eccentric engineer and inventor who had previously made a modest fortune designing fairground rides and caravans. Clarke had an extraordinary gift for lateral thinking, the ability to look at an object and see not what it was, but what it could be made to become. In 1940, he joined the SOE and was eventually assigned to Station 9, housed in a Victorian country house called the Frythe, near Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire. The house was requisitioned from a hotel company, its staff removed, its grounds sealed, and its interiors converted into a maze of workshops, testing areas, and laboratories. Here Clarke worked alongside chemists, engineers, physicists, and craftsmen who had been quietly recruited from universities, factories, and trade workshops across Britain. Their collective brief was extraordinary in its scope and peculiar in its specifics, to develop disguised, concealed, and special-purpose weapons for use by irregular forces. They called their work, with characteristic British understatement, special devices. The technical ingenuity required to make these devices function was considerable, and nowhere more so than in the field of silent firearms. The conventional suppressor, or silencer, had existed since the early 20th century, but it was bulky, impractical, and relatively ineffective. What the SOE needed was something fundamentally different. The solution produced at Station 9 was the well rod, a weapon so unusual in its conception that it defies easy classification. It was, in essence, a bolt-action pistol built around its own integral silencer. The well rod measured approximately 32 centimetres in length and weighed roughly 900 grams, not unlike a large torch. The barrel was surrounded by a cylindrical suppressor unit some 12 centimetres long, packed with a series of rubber wiper seals and wire mesh baffles. When the pistol was fired, the expanding propellant gases were forced through these baffles in sequence. Their pressure bled off incrementally, rather than expelled in a single violent burst. The result was a sound report comparable, by contemporary accounts, to a quiet hand clap or the snap of a book being shut. At a distance of 6 meters, the dominant noise was not the gun itself, but the mechanical click of the bolt being cycled. The well rod was chambered primarily in 9mm parabellum, with some early variants chambered in .32 ACP. It held between 6 and 8 rounds in a detachable magazine that also served as the pistol's grip, and it was designed for use at extremely close range, ideally within arm's reach of the target. It was not a weapon of war in any conventional sense. It was a tool of assassination, built to be held against a man's coat, and fired without the person standing 2 meters away, being certain they had heard anything at all. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Production figures remain imprecise, as many SOE records were deliberately destroyed at the war's end. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 well rods were manufactured, primarily at a facility in Birmingham, with component parts sourced from across the Midlands engineering supply chain. The weapon was reportedly simple enough to produce that portions of it could be made in ordinary machine shops without the workers necessarily understanding what they were building. Alongside the well rod, Station 9 produced an entire ecosystem of disguised explosives, and it is here that the sheer surreal creativity of Britain's secret weapons programme becomes most apparent. The coal bomb was exactly what it sounds like, a lump of what appeared to be coal, moulded from plastic explosive, and coated in black paint, mixed with coal dust to replicate the texture and lustre of genuine anthracite. When mixed into a coal supply at a power station, railway depot, or industrial facility, it would find its way into a furnace in the ordinary course of operations. The resulting explosion would typically destroy the furnace entirely. German intelligence reports from occupied territories document a persistent, low-level anxiety about contaminated coal supplies that persisted throughout the war. This was, at least in part, the coal bomb's doing. The dead rat, though perhaps the most theatrical of Station 9's concealed weapons, was operationally deployed with limited success. The plan was elegant. A real rat skin, acquired in quantity from furriers and taxidermists, would be packed with plastic explosive, sewn shut, and placed in a location where it would naturally be shoveled into a furnace. The Germans, however, discovered a consignment of the devices before they could be widely deployed, and promptly issued instructions to every sapper and maintenance unit on the continent that all dead rats were to be treated with suspicion. The practical effect of this instruction was perhaps more disruptive than the devices themselves would ever have been. German soldiers and maintenance workers began finding dead rats genuinely alarming, which created a persistent low-level operational burden entirely disproportionate to the number of explosive rats that actually existed. The weapons that were never used had, in a sense, already worked. The comparison with German equivalents is instructive and reveals something telling about the different character of each nation's approach to irregular warfare. Germany's Abwehr and, later, the SD maintained their own technical development programs and produced concealed weapons of genuine ingenuity. The Kleinstflugkörper, or miniature projectile system, represented a sophisticated approach to concealed single-shot weapons. German engineers also developed explosive devices disguised as books, briefcases, and items of personal luggage, and their anti-tank mines included buried pressure devices of real sophistication. What the German program generally lacked, however, was the systematic focus on supporting mass civilian resistance, rather than individual elite operations. Station 9 designed for the untrained user. German special weapons tended to be designed for Brandenburgers or SD specialists, trained operatives rather than French farmers or Belgian shopworkers. The American Office of Strategic Services, which drew heavily on SOE expertise and ultimately collaborated closely with British operations, produced its own range of special devices. The OSS Liberator pistol, for instance, was a single-shot weapon produced for mass distribution in occupied territories. It was cheaper and simpler than the well rod, but substantially louder and less concealable. The two approaches reflected the different strategic assumptions of each organisation. Britain, having been conducting irregular operations since 1940, had developed a much finer sense of what a civilian resistance operative actually needed in the field. The legacy of the work done at Station 9 is difficult to quantify in the way that the impact of a tank regiment or a bombing campaign might be measured. There was no battle won or lost on the strength of the well rod alone, no campaign decided by the coal bomb. What the devices produced at the Frythe contributed was something more diffuse and, in some respects, more corrosive to an occupying force. The persistent, grinding sense that nothing could be trusted, that the coal might explode, that the dead rat in the corner of the engine room was a deliberate placement, that the man standing a metre away might be holding something unrecognisably lethal. Historians of occupation and resistance have noted consistently that the psychological burden imposed on German forces by SOE activities was disproportionate to the material damage caused. Every successful sabotage operation, every contaminated supply depot, every unexplained industrial explosion required an investigative and security response that consumed manpower and resources. The weapons of Station 9 were, in the most direct sense, force multipliers applied to the imagination of the enemy. The well rod itself went on to a remarkably long operational life. Versions of the weapon were reportedly used by Allied forces during the conflicts in Malaya and Korea. An unconfirmed account suggests that British special forces have carried the design, in various forms, into conflicts as recent as the Falklands War of 1982 and possibly beyond. The precise operational history is, understandably, not publicly documented. Several original well rods survive in museum collections, most notably at the Duxford Imperial War Museum in Cambridgeshire, and in the collection of the SOE archive held at the National Archives at Kew. They are unremarkable objects to look at. That is, of course, the point. Station 9 itself was quietly wound down after the war. The Frythe returned, eventually, to civilian use. The engineers and chemists who had spent the war producing explosive rats and silent pistols returned, largely without public acknowledgement to their peacetime professions. The records they left behind were, in many cases, deliberately incomplete. The SOE destroyed the bulk of its operational files in 1945, a decision that historians have found professionally exasperating ever since. What survives is fragmentary: technical drawings, production orders, after-action reports from field operations, and occasional references in German intelligence documents to strange devices recovered from captured operatives or discovered in unexpected places. The picture that emerges from these fragments is one of an organisation operating at the far edge of what was technically and imaginatively possible, creating objects that had no precedent and filling a gap that nobody had previously recognised existed. Stand again in that basement laboratory in the winter of 1941. Watch the man in the laboratory coat set down his explosive rat, make his note, and move on to the next item on the workbench. The thermos flask, packed with incendiary material, disguised well enough to pass a casual inspection. The fountain pen, which is not a fountain pen. The log of wood, indistinguishable from any of 1,000 similar logs stacked in 1,000 similar woodsheds across occupied Europe, except for the charge of plastic explosive buried in its core. None of these objects look like weapons. That is their entire purpose. They represent a particular and peculiar achievement. Not the triumph of engineering over physics, but the triumph of deception over expectation. The greatest weapon produced at Station 9 was not the well rod pistol, or the coal bomb, or the explosive rat. It was the idea, planted in the mind of every German soldier from the Atlantic Wall to the Eastern Front, that the ordinary world might not be ordinary at all, that the rat might be a bomb, that the coal might be a bomb, that the man standing close enough to whisper might be holding something no one would ever describe as a weapon. Britain built weapons too strange to use, and the strangeness was precisely the point.